Okay, everybody, welcome back after lunch. This is we're going over 2026 through 2030, the tentative, I emphasize tentative, capital improvement program. So, Lauren, take it away.
Okay, well, we don't have any pages in your binder, but Lindsay has provided all the handouts. So I'm just going to turn it over to her.
Turn it over to her, Lindsay Porizeau.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I love that I never have to introduce myself. So this is, as I was telling folks, not my most favorite thing to do either, nor do I know that you look forward to this because it's 2 hours of just so much fun. So I want this to be really informal. It's a lot of content. Please, anybody get up, move around, go stand up if you need to. It's not going to hurt my feelings. And unlike with other presentations that we do during budget hearings, I would love for this to be relatively interactive. So if you have questions or comments, just kind of jump in. I would also encourage anybody in the audience, particularly on any of these projects that relate to your departments, jump in if there's something you think it's important for the commissioners to know that I haven't shared. Cool. Okay, so the way this is going to work is we will talk through the CIP process generally, why and how we got to this part of the process. Then we'll get into facility and drainage projects. Then I will turn it over to either Lynn or Daniel. It looks like maybe Daniel will be talking with you about road and bridge projects. And then once he's done and you all have had your conversation on that, I'll come back to the podium to walk through the financing plan. So you have 3 handouts at your seats. You have the PowerPoint itself. You have a document that looks like this, which is color coded. It will match what you see on screens. This is facility and drainage. And then you also have a packet that was, I think it's 3 pages long from Public Works that lists out the plans for the road and bridge. So we're going to be bouncing between all 3 of those today, and we'll try and let you know as we're moving around what we're moving around to. So again, the purpose of the county CIP is really, it's a best practice under government standards. It basically allows us to define capital projects and then plan for them. So it's really important at Sedgwick County to emphasize what the CIP is not. And so I'm going to point you to this 3rd row on this slide that says it is not heavy equipment. It's not vehicles, not operating equipment, furniture, software. Not any of that. Now, some governments will plan for that in their capital improvement plan because those are considered to be types of capital assets. But at Sedgwick County, we define it as either new construction, renovation, those kinds of things. That's at least $50,000, or it's a major maintenance or rehab project. That's at least $25,000. So it has to meet one of those thresholds in order to qualify to be considered for the CIP. So this establishes a process by which all of the county's 46 departments can come to county management initially and then to the commission to basically identify their capital needs. And then we can prioritize those in a single plan. And of course, we always try at the bottom or at the end of this to focus on the bottom line. What can we afford? What's urgent? What's less urgent? And then, of course, just like everything to do with budget, the intent is to communicate this to the public so that they understand what your priorities are as a part of the budget process. So this year's CIP committee is listed here. We try and get diverse representation from all parts of the organization. I also want to thank Justin from MAPD, who sits on the committee for kind of that global picture comprehensive plan part of the plan. So these folks take a lot of their time, which we'll talk through to be a part of this process. And so really appreciate everything that they do to try and bring a fair plan to you. And Scott, you can look forward to joining this committee in the future. So pay close attention. Okay, so at the normally kind of at the tail end of the year, maybe a little sooner this upcoming year, Andrew or someone in his department will put out an all call to the organization and say, if you have any capital requests, here's the timeline by which you must submit those. So there's adequate time to work with facilities in order to get those project requests in our system. And once those are presented by a deadline, a lovely book this size is assembled for the CIP committee members to look at each of those projects. If a project has been funded in the prior year, we verify with the department that they still want that project to be considered. So once that gets submitted, it is a lengthy process. When I talk about this committee dedicating a lot of time, we hear presentations on all new projects. We hear presentations on projects that maybe we've forgotten a little bit about or need some clarification, especially if they're large. Then we put that information, we list those out in a big scoring sheet, and every one of those committee members that I showed you goes in and assigns a score between 0 and 10 on every one of these categories. And those categories have different weightings associated with them. So for example, if it's a protection of public health or safety, that's going to have the highest weighting. 1 point for that doesn't just count as 1, it's going to count as 1.5, because we want that to be considered at a higher premium in terms of getting funded. So once we go through that process, the scores are part 1. It does not drive the whole process. Conversation drives the whole process. So we'll get together and look at all of those scores and how things shake out. And then we go through and categorize them. And this corresponds to your handout that looks like this, because basically we say if it's a category 1 project, either it's preventive maintenance, your roofs, your parking lots, things like that, where we want to make sure we stay on top of that. So that's just going to be a category 1, or it's something that's urgent. The CIP committee believes that it's something that absolutely has to be done in the next year of the plan. If it's category 2, it's important, but it's not as important as those urgent needs. And so in that case, we'll put them in for funding in years 2 and 3 of your 5-year CIP plan, or at least we'll start them in years 2 or 3. And category 3, of course, are projects that we think are needed, but certainly not as critical as those others. And so those will go in years 4 and 5 of the plan that you'll see today. And finally, category 4 are what we call watch list. So it doesn't mean that the project isn't important. What it means is that we either don't have enough information yet to give it either a firm price, or maybe there's other considerations that we need to keep in mind and some other decisions have to be made before it's ready. So examples will be, if you look on your sheet, and I don't want to get too far ahead, but would be a lot of parks projects right now that you'll see that historically had been funded. But we have a master plan project that's being worked on, I think, with City of Wichita. And so that may drive a CIP. So we don't want to be investing funds in something that would be kind of counterintuitive. So once we've gone through and had that conversation, then it's my job to take that back and try and assign it to a funding plan. And that basically looks like, again, in accordance with your debt policy that says we prefer cash, but sometimes debt's okay under certain circumstances. And so we take that into account, take into account what the financial forecast looks like, and we try and fit those projects in. So then once that's complete, it goes back to the CIP committee for review. And the end result then is approval of a tentative CIP, which is what we then present to you right now. This is the step here in the first bullet. Now, as the chairman said at the beginning of this, and I can't emphasize this enough, this isn't actually recommended yet. This is a tentative recommendation. Tom hasn't signed off on this. Commissioners haven't signed off on this. You haven't seen this yet. And so we need your feedback. What we don't want to do is get to June where we are making final decisions on what to go in the recommended budget and have it be something that's totally out of step with what the commission expects. So this is what the CIP committee is presenting to you for consideration. We don't expect this to be a final product. We do expect questions. We do expect additional workshops between now and June. We just need to know what catches your attention and what additional questions you have so we can prepare for that.
Lindsay,
So-
since
sir.
you requested this to be informal and
Please.
so, I mean, how defined do you want that to be in the questions of tentativeness? I mean, obviously we need to be looking towards, 26, 27. But I mean, the outer years, I mean, do you want us to be particular on the outer years, the levels 3 and 4?
No, but one of the things you're going to see is here's category 3.
Right.
There's 2 projects. So I'm not looking for a lot of that. Really, I think the most useful information is going to be as we're going through these, if you see things that are not a priority for you, if you think we have overemphasized the importance of something or underemphasized,
Okay.
we need that. If you have, just absolute tension over the cost of something and you want us to go back and try and revise scale, that would be helpful. From my perspective, I am most concerned about your cash funding in the 2026 budget. That's part 1. And part 2 is your long-term bond funding.
Okay.
If you start removing projects that are going to be bond funded, that then potentially becomes problematic because of how we plan to
Right.
spend
That's right.
your debt service funds. And we try and keep those stabilized. So those are the 2 things I would ask you to really keep at the forefront of your mind from my perspective. Also, this has been somewhat considered in the scope that we can't do everything at once. You have an awesome project services team, but they can't do everything. And they've got some big projects they're working on today. So we are trying to stagger some of that out too,
Okay.
based on workload. So that would be the other consideration I would give you from a staff perspective. And if anybody else has anything from the CIP committee to ask for consideration on, I welcome your feedback. Not seeing anybody hit a mic, so
Good to know. Thanks.
ready to keep going?
Yes.
Okay. So we are going to get now into the facilities and drainage portion. So what you're going to see on these slides is little font. This has better size font and is probably easier to read because it's on one page as opposed to how it fits on these PowerPoints where it's scattered. So this is a great resource or reference to look back and see what maybe project we're talking about, but I would encourage you to look at the more detailed spreadsheet for information. And I do want to say at the beginning of this, this presentation has been done for quite a while. Maybe not the numbers, but the layout. This is exactly what you've seen. But I watched a master class this morning that talked about telling you guys what I want you to take away at the beginning of the conversation instead of giving you the facts and leading you to a conclusion. So I'm going to put that into practice and I'm going to violate my own rules and send you to the back page. And what I want you to see is all the beautiful, beautiful black on this bottom table. What you should know about these tables is red is bad and black is good. If you see red, I'm making the forecast worse. If you see black, I'm making the forecast better. You can see that across all 5 years, the very bottom line is that even everything you're going to hear today, and there's going to be some big numbers you're going to hear today, your forecast is going to improve based on what we're putting out to you today. So have that in the back of your mind. Okay, so now I've broken my own rule and we're going back to the presentation. Thank you for humoring me. Okay, so the very first thing we're going to talk about is flood control. So you will remember from the retreat that we talked about flood control as a joint operation between the city and the county. You will see in the public works budget that there is funding on top of this that goes out as a contractual payment to the city of Wichita, but this is the capital improvement portion of that. And so again, this is all about the Wichita Valley Center floodway and MS Mitchell, floodway. So right now, this is in for $740,000 per year for those like Commissioner Meitzner and Commissioner Howell who have been here for a minute. This used to be $500,000. So this number has gone up, but we are not terribly surprised. The floodway is not getting any younger. Accreditation is not getting easier. And inflation certainly isn't any help. Now, there are some additional considerations that we'll have to talk about either as a part of this budget process or later, where the city is coming and asking for some additional funding to go toward equipment replacement for them that would significantly increase this cost. That is not yet factored in here, but understand that that's something the city is asking, and we will need to have that conversation. And sorry for the weird printing. I don't know if it did it on yours, but it's appearing to making some letters skip out of my print job. Are yours look okay? Okay, great. So then the next row is replacing roofs on county-owned buildings. So this is something that the county has really been in the business of trying to get ahead of since 2009, 2010, when a master plan was created. That plan is updated basically every year through on-calls who come and check the status of the roofs on all of the properties that we own to see where we are. And then what you'll see is different amounts in all 5 years of the forecast, or every 5 of the plan, excuse me, based on what roofs are planned to be replaced in that year. So again, these numbers will fluctuate from year to year. What you see here is not the same as what you saw from last year, and that's because we are getting kind of that real-time analysis. Next, you'll see parking lots. It was about the same time that there was an analysis done to create kind of a master plan for parking lots. This is the same type of approach on roofs, where those are updated every so often based on analysis that's done. And you can see that these revised figures in here are based on what we expect for 26 and 27. So then we move to everyone's favorite, Tim's especially. Siren replacement and new installation. So a couple of years ago, you'll recall that we had been funding siren repairs to the tune of $110,000 year after year after year after year. We actually went through a process of getting a new type of siren, and it backfired majorly. So while we are now spending much more each year, for the next 3 years, you will see in the 4th year that price cuts down in half because we only funded half of it in year 1. So we're funding half of it in year 6. But no more $110,000 in 2030. This will allow them, they believe, to absorb this in their operating budget without having to do an annual allocation. So while we will still maintain a siren replacement system or a siren warning system, again, for outdoor people only, it's not intended to be heard in your house. Julie would want me to say that. We are going to save some money in that year. So that's really exciting for me. Moving down, public elevator upgrades. The intention of facilities is to move this to a preventive schedule, much like we're doing with roofs and parking lots. You may recall that the last couple of years, we've been looking at doing some modernization of elevators in the courthouse, the historic courthouse, and elevator in the garage and other things. But recognizing that we have aging buildings across the board, this is something where I think facilities is trying to get ahead of the curve and make sure that we're planning. So this will become much like roofs and parking lots, where you'll just begin to see amounts plugged in whatever years are needed in order to keep up with that.
Is that bringing those elevators up to do the video communication?
Up to, I don't repeat your question, or maybe Andrew knows what
The
you're talking
elevator
about.
code says you have to have a video communication. That's just a telephone, talk to the emergency person, but you have to have a video connection. Is that what this is doing?
That was not the priority of this CIP. This CIP will modernize the equipment. So you have a situation like the store courthouse where you have one elevator and the equipment goes down. You can't find a replacement. So the elevator's out of order. However, when we're doing these modernizations, typically they require those codes and those things to roll out, and we'll try to implement that as part of the CIP to bring it up to code within the existing budget that we're asking for.
Okay, moving right along. I do know we have a hard stop around 3-ish, sooner than that, or is it right at 3? To get you guys to your very important, more important than me meeting. Huh? What? 2:45. Okay, well, I'll talk faster. So Public Works open face vehicle storage buildings. This is one that was included in the 2025 adopt a budget CIP for these years. So we've left them in these years, but they've gotten cheaper. So good job, Lynn. What this basically means is that we're going to have some vehicle storage buildings in Andale, Clonmel, and North Yard. So we're going to be able to put those bigger pieces of equipment under some shelters to try and extend their lives and make sure that they're not just exposed to the elements 24/7. Next is something that I'm going to rely real heavily on Andrew to talk about if you have questions. But this is the building automation system replacement and also some HVAC retrofits. So if you'll recall during last year's presentations, we talked about some of the aging technology that we have in place to control climate. This year's in 2025, it was all about the jail. But what we actually have right now is contradictory messages being sent to our HVAC system, where sometimes it'll blow warm air at the same time something else is blowing cool air. It's horribly inefficient. And it's because we have this outdated system that's not really able to be updated anymore. And so what this CIP does is it looks to replace that in the other buildings. Again, I'm going to tell you that while these numbers are big, they are less big than they were. And again, overall, your forecast looks better. So if you have questions on this particular item, this is probably the one I'm the twitchiest about trying to explain. So I will defer to my friend Andrew. Mr. Meitzner.
Buildings. In 2026, this includes the main courthouse, historic courthouse, Munger, public safety, regional forensic science, and the extension office.
So if you had to drag this out to 2030, what would you say? Can they be prioritized to say we have to do these two buildings or three?
So
With it,
I'll tell you the number that you see on the board here. I do not think we're going to get to doing this work. I think we're going to come in under that, but I'm basing this off of the estimates that have been provided to me by an engineer. When we package all this together and actually get it on the scale and be able to do this for less money. Part of this is when we put this out to bid, we are getting a software that coordinates all of these components to the HVAC system. One benefit that we have is by packaging these together, we have one software program that's running all of these buildings. So that's only one software staff have to learn and they get familiar with it. When we start spacing this out over multiple years, we get more and more different levels of software programming and it creates more confusion. But that is certainly something we can look at. And as we look at this with forensic science on here, we also have a forensic science, another portion of forensic science on the CIP. So that's maybe something you can pull off of this and incorporate in part of the remodel and maybe save some money there and lessen that dollar amount for 2026.
and Lindsay, you're saying this is the cash funding on this one?
We have to because of the life expectancy. If you recall in your debt policy, it says whatever we issue debt for, that asset has to exist for that entire length of time that we're doing the bond proceeds. And we don't expect this software system to live 20 years.
Well, I'm glad we had our recognition Wednesday before I saw this today.
Rude.
Just kidding.
Just kidding. Ha ha.
Hey, when you start saying software, I think Brad Joe's at the table. We're going to run into some end of life stuff here in 3 or 4 years where we got to do $4 more million to do a whole new system or anything like that. I mean, what?
So right now we're running on a system and Kendall's here in the back to help me if I get any of this wrong. But
Oh, he is.
the system that we're running on right now is over 20 years old.
Right.
And that is primarily what this CIP is replacing. It's targeting all those buildings that are on that system. So when we have components fail out in the field, we're trying to find something that's refurbished that's used somewhere else.
Right.
We're buying-
I'm just talking about this software system we're implementing. And I mean, do we have some runway with this thing for a bit of time or?
Yeah, I kind of view this separate from the technology world
Okay.
because it's
Yeah.
so intertwined into the facilities and it's proprietary software that, Train's going to offer one, every manufacturer is going to offer something.
Yeah, I've done these before and it gets challenging.
And again, nothing's going to get cheaper. And I think we've maybe run the runway out on this, which is why
Okay.
we're now talking about it at the 20-year mark. Things are starting to fail. We're paying extra for utilities. It's,
I remember last year we had this discussion. I thought I remember seeing a cost savings analysis over a period of time. Would you be willing to
Yep.
resend that if you haven't?
absolutely.
Just eases the heartburn on $6 million of thermostats.
Yes, we will get that to you.
Okay.
Okay, so moving to your next slide. The Public Works Salt Storage Building at the East Yard, you might recall this would be year 2 of this program. We've talked about how when we talked with our bond counsel and municipal advisor, we were told not to kind of lump sum dollars in 1 year. We really needed to space it out based on when we thought those costs were going to be incurred so that we could properly report that to credit rating agencies and talk about when we actually plan to issue debt. So year 1 in 2025 was a portion of funding less than $100,000 for the design of this facility. Now what you see is the actual intended construction of this. So as it's been described to me, and we have these subject matter experts here if you'd like to hear from them, but basically we have a wood structure that's sitting on an asphalt mat that's been in service for more than 30 years. And so the goal is to replace it with a larger steel framed fabric structure, which is similar to other facilities that they've constructed. So that is the goal for doing this project. And again, because we're already in the design phase this year, this is intended to be completed in 2026, and we would issue bonds at the end of 2026 for this project. Moving to the next one, adult detention facility domestic water heater replacement. So there are 6, big hot water heaters in the jail. They were, this is phasing in replacements of those. There were 2 that were put in 1997, 2 in 2009, 1 in 2005, 1 in 2012. These run the kitchen, the laundry, showers, and restrooms in the facility. And so this is, again, trying to phase out the replacement of those water heaters. So pretty straightforward on that one. And you can see this would be year 3 for that project. So we've already done years 1, and then this year would be year 2. The next one is, we think, pretty critical. It's the main courthouse perimeter security. So basically it would be putting up bollards around the main courthouse so that you can't have bad actors try and drive into the facility. Or even if it's not a bad actor, just something inadvertently happens. Some of you might recall the truck that managed to go through the bollards and hit the arena several years ago on a holiday weekend. So we're trying to make sure that nothing like that can happen. So that was in last year's CIP for 2026, and we thought that should remain there. Next is the jail annex technology upgrade. And I realized that when we say technology upgrade in the scope of CIP, that sounds really weird. We would think maybe that ought to be in technology review board instead. So what I would want to tell you about this is the equipment that basically allows for all of the video equipment to operate within that facility. So what we are learning is that those are old enough that there's actual failures occurring. We may not be capturing video. And of course, that's critical, as we have learned with reviewing any potential incidents that may occur. And so this is brand new this year as a CIP request, but it's made it into year 1 of the CIP proposal because of that urgency. And what we see is the criticality of making sure that technology is updated. Next is district court gallery wall movement. Now, you'll hear other people call it pony walls. Basically, it's the wall that it separates, but it puts up a space between basically where the courtroom activity is happening and those who are observing the courtroom activities. So in the new courtrooms that were constructed, there was a failure of realization for those folks of how all the technology and the room was actually going to be used by attorneys and by witnesses. And there are some obstructions that are occurring. And so the ask by district court is to move those gallery walls back from where they are today to provide more space for the lawyers and all of the stuff they bring with them, to create some sight lines between witness boxes and attorneys, to give some additional space for the courtroom reporters. This was all originally paid for with ARPA funds. We wish that this had been realized during the course of reviews with district court staff. Yes. But this is really, at the end of the day, a service, a customer service type thing, making sure that those folks who are actually in our courtrooms can use them appropriately and we're not creating obstructions. So what you'll see here is a relatively small dollar amount to do that in those courtrooms. Next, this is a big one. And this is what we were talking about this morning for the Regional Forensic Science Center. So what this would do, to basically explain exactly what Dr. Stedman explained earlier, is it's replacing a prior CIP project that we had on the books. I think Tanya and Andrew also talked about this at the retreat a little bit. There had been a property that was necessary in order to do the project that we had envisioned that would have cost about $7.5 million. That property owner is not willing to sell that ground. It has been tried multiple times. It's a dead end. So trying to look at other alternatives now, what the alternative is to construct a separate additional facility for the Regional Forensic Science Center. And basically it's looking out for 20 years what they think the needs will be. So the new building will provide space for DNA, firearms, drug ID, and their fire debris labs. And that will allow their existing DNA lab to basically be repurposed for toxicology, medical investigations, and autopsies. And we know that their demand for service has gone up exponentially. We don't see that changing at any time. Plus, there are all kinds of new standards that have been rolled out just in kind of the jurisprudence world in terms of making sure there's no contamination, making sure that there's appropriate ventilation for all of these things. But the good news I have for you is, I'm going to take you back to the admin building. Sorry, Commissioner Meitzner. You had originally planned for you had authorized a $27 million bond issuance total for an admin building. We issued half of that funding up front, just like we talked about during your meeting yesterday. Now, based on the fact that we have cash available from our ARPA revenue replacement, there is no longer any plan to issue that second half of debt for an admin building. What that means is we're able to take the debt service that had been planned for the admin building and divert it to the Regional Forensic Science Center, so that even though this overall project cost is increasing significantly from the $7.5 million, but those two things cancel each other out in your forecast. So again, this is something that Rusty's not here to say to you, but there are a number of projects on here that are public safety related. This is his highest priority. This has been something that the Regional Forensic Science Center has needed for years. We had funded a CIP project. That CIP project was halted because of the land issue. So this is something that we really think deserves some immediate attention.
I would just say the things that are on this list, I think all are important, but I also would agree with Rusty that I think this is probably one of the highest priorities we have. I was recently down, Dr. Sedgwick toured my CAP down there recently, and it's apparent, it is obvious that there is no space. And I do think it's impacting capacity to perform. So I'm pleased to see that this is on the CIP, and I think it should be a high priority.
And just to speak to, again, why there's 2 years of funding for this, again, because of that advice that we received from our experts. We're planning for that design and engineering in year 1 and the actual construction in year 2,
Okay.
so that we can then appropriately plan for when we're going to issue the bonds.
You should get a message over to our friends over at the city that this is happening. I've heard frequently that they've got questions about our turnaround times and things of this sort. So, I mean,
This is only tentative, sir.
I understand, but when it's not anymore,
Yes,
that there is investment happening to make sure capacity is expanding.
yes.
Where is it supposed to happen? I mean,
So-
the land right there's like landlocked.
So the health department has, and I will defer to the facilities folks if they want to jump in, but the health department has that parking lot that's just to their north. This would be taking some of that space. So it'd be And he can show you a map, apparently.
Well, since you got the map, I was going, can have a,
Is your mic on, sir?
yeah, can we have a, kind of a summary of what this would look like? I mean, we've done that with the juvenile campus and other things, just kind of,
You want to workshop it maybe?
well. I
Or a
guess
staff
if it-
meeting presentation?
Yeah,
Maybe?
maybe.
Okay.
I don't know if the rest of the commission wants, I just like to get my hands
Well,
around
for
it.
$20 million, we're happy to do a staff meeting
Yeah, it's a
presentation.
little,
Riverside Hospital would be cheaper, just saying. Throw that out there. Or the old library. Yes, it's more of a joke really, but
Oh, okay.
Everybody pause. Let's throw that out there.
but what about Century Two?
Century too.
Okay,
That's a
moving
good
right
idea.
along. We got a hard stop. I appreciate the
I
humor.
thought that would be
Thank
worth
you.
saying.
Okay, noted. Moving right along. So the next item on the list is the largest single project we're going to talk about today. And that is the ComCare complex. So this is something that has come up in conversation with commissioners, I think a couple times in an informal fashion.
Yeah.
And so staff took that and ran with it. I know Tim and Joan and Andrew and Tanya have been talking about when our leases run out on certain properties that we own. Certainly we know, and we've heard many times, ComCare clients are not necessarily the easiest, and not every landlord welcomes ComCare clients. And so that has led to a lot of changing locations over the years, which is not great for clients. It's certainly also not inexpensive to move constantly. Now, you will recall that historically the county has had an approach that when it's grant funded, we don't necessarily want to own the property, because if the grant goes away, we're stuck with property that then we have to figure out what to do with. But ComCare is now in a unique situation because of their CCBHC designation, where now they can receive funding, they can rebase, they can anticipate and get some funding for 3 years. So their charges for service, they're not as much grant.
Sure.
And so what this would allow is to have a centralized facility for administration, adult services, adult medical services, and children programs, which are now at 4 different locations. And so it would be a patient-centered environment instead of just making, whatever lease space we have work. And the beautiful thing of this that I want to make sure to articulate, and it's in your footnote here, we would anticipate going and using these dollars in our next rebasing so that we could begin to pay off bond proceeds using CCBHC revenues. So while this is a very expensive cost and will increase the overall load of debt that we carry, it will not be property tax supported funds that repay the debt service.
Okay.
And I think that's a really important.
It
thing
is
to know.
important. I'm actually, I do think there's a need here. I'm surprised to see it in 26. I thought we would have.
Well, it's a kind of a 3 to 4 year
See it.
planning process. I think the idea would be maybe some acquisition of property, if we can, gives us latitude to start planning. The construction on this is going to be significant. We've seen this with ComCare Crisis. We've seen it with State Mental Health Hospital. None of this stuff happens fast. It's going to be a multi-year construction project. And so this lays it out over multiple years to be able to stagger that and plan for it. But the bond issuance, and we'll get to it at a later slide, actually wouldn't be anticipated until about 2029.
And to be fair, this is staff driven. We've never heard the elected body endorse it. So it'd be great to get an endorsement.
Okay. Commissioner Howe?
How many square feet are we talking about for this complex? Approximately 80.
Oh, boy.
200.
Oh, boy.
That was a joke again.
I have a thought. Go ahead.
200,000 is the number that it seems to be available down the street here. So
I think I'm not making policy, but with the change of the landscape, the way financing is, it does shift our thoughts from leasing buildings, not knowing what the future is versus a steady. And because we've never done this before, I think the one right before that, the forensic science, that's a construction project. This is more of we have a big picture look at potentially all on one campus could look like. And where and RFP and all that stuff is not as relevant as do we want to, as a body, do we want to recommend that we really go forward in looking at it? And well, let's evaluate where we're at. The leases, the numbers, how much footage.
So,
departments.
and this would essentially eliminate 4 leases that we have with Comcare. They have a lease on North Amadon. They have the Center City lease, right around the corner here. They have a lease on North Woodlawn, and then they have a lease out of Harry Street. And so that would take all of those locations. In addition to, it would also take Comcare administrative offices out of Ronald Reagan Building and bring them all onto one campus setting. So you'd have that location, and you'd have the new Comcare crisis location, only 2 locations for.
And that's a bondable project that you're saying we'd have a revenue stream that would be.
Correct.
Can I,
Let's
yeah, I think
consider.
it's worthy. I would ask about the revenue stream. I know we could trying to figure this at CCBHC. Does that calculus impact how we view our partners, the MHAs of the world and other? Does that?
Let me tell you why.
Okay.
So we can submit for rebasing in 2027.
Okay, that's right.
So we would be able to anticipate whatever MHA's costs would be at that point in time. We also would be able to include this building at that point in time. And I'll let Tim speak to anything that I'm misstating or elaborate on anything.
That makes sense. The rebasing changes the,
Yes.
yeah.
It's all accurate. And the other thing to consider is that there are rental payments going out right now,
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
roughly $1 million. And so that's,
Yeah, it's almost 1.1
Annually?
today.
Mhm. Yep, okay.
But this proposal is to own a building.
Correct.
And you just made an argument for not owning the building.
Can I speak to that? What we put in there was the high price if we were to acquire land and then build. That doesn't mean that we're not gonna look for an existing building and see if that works to potentially remodel. But what we plugged in was, what I wanted to plug in was, let's plug in the highest amount, but then we would certainly look for an existing building and see.
I think that's why I was surprised to see it in 26, because I know there's still a lot of work. Is that 2.1? What would that 26 number represent?
This is all based off of new construction because we don't know what's
Okay.
going to be on the market in 2026 and what we're going to find. So we could find an existing building and come back to you and say that $2 million isn't going to be enough to buy this existing building. However, we think we can save money on telling by not having to have as much in construction.
I think what drove a lot of this was understanding the timelines on those leases, making sure that we were, the team was concerned that if we put all of this in outer years and we didn't start a process until the outer years, it would take us longer. We would have to renew leases. It would create further issues for us. And so they just wanted to make sure there was some funding available in 2026. If this is a vision that the commission supports, that having a CIP project that's approved allows them to do things that they cannot do if it hasn't yet been approved.
That makes sense.
I think we need to workshop this a little
Yes.
bit. Again, just a couple
Good.
I agree.
points here. I mean, I thought you made an argument a minute ago, just saying funding isn't certain forever. So owning the building actually puts us a little bit at risk of owning the building if funding streams would change in the future. So there's an argument not to own it. If we are going to lease, I don't know what synergy you have by putting these 5 things together versus the way we have it today. I'm not so sure because there's not crossover. I don't know that, I'm not sure there's crossover between those 5 things. Maybe there is, but if the efficiency that you gain, but you're talking about significant investment to reconfigure our way we do things now to a campus setting. And I'm not sure you'll ever have a break even point at that to do that.
one comment to that, Commissioner, is that you saw some staffing. The Comcare continues to struggle with staffing. Part of the problem is there aren't enough people licensed to do the work that they need to do. And so if we've got all of those people in the same facility, we may be able to realize some real efficiencies from staffing in that.
Yeah,
regard.
I would agree on the workshop. I do think we need to, I'm not opposed to this because I like the campus concept. I do think there's some scale efficiencies that can be had. I'll just tell you off the top of my head, I want to make sure the numbers, I know that's a high end number. I'm not worried about that number. I'm talking about, we got a lot of building projects going on. a lot. I mean, and admin, juvenile, ComCare crisis, elections. I mean, you just up and down the list, they're busy. So I want to be cognizant of the community's reaction that we're becoming big real estate, pretty big real estate company right now. So I want to be cognizant of that, but I'm not saying the need's not there, but I want to workshop it and vet it out and kind of flesh out these ideas.
And if we are going to go forward, I want to make sure we know what our requirements. I really like to see us find something that is not necessarily new construction. That size of building is around. I don't think that needs to be downtown. I think that could be someplace else. So there are buildings out there.
Well, and I think if this project is approved, the next conversation after that becomes how do we proceed? Do we do it like we did with the mental health hospital where it's an RFP where you say, here's what we need, which means these guys would have to flesh that out with more detail. I don't know how quickly that happens. Or if you have somebody like one of our on-call real estate brokers who goes out and tries to find a property that fits our needs. There are different paths that we can take that we will come back to the commission and get more direction on. This is literally step one. This doesn't commit you to spending funding.
I get it. Let's workshop it.
Yep.
And then, but what you said about the rebasing and the CCBHC fee structures and what it could do to eliminate the property tax burden on the debt service is really intriguing. There might be an opportunity there. Okay, let's.
I don't know that you would see this without having that opportunity.
I got that sense, which is why I want to flesh it out a little bit
Yeah.
more. Okay.
Okay. We will get this scheduled for a workshop. Okay, moving to, this is category 1 in total. You can see it is by far our largest single category, totaling $79.7 million. But again, half of that is not anticipated to be property tax supported. So big emphasis there. So then moving to our blue section, category 2. This is much shorter, but still 2 slides. So the first one that's listed here again is a project that's carried forward from a prior year CIP, and that is replacing the 22-year-old steam boiler that basically controls Munger and Historic. And it will go end of life this year. It already contains steel water tubes that are obsolete and it can't be replaced because that original manufacturer isn't in business. So we have already kind of kicked this can down the road. This is about as far out as we think we can kick the can. So that's why it's in category 2. Then moving down to the next one is replacing HVAC at multiple EMS facilities. That actually just includes 3 posts. Originally, you might recall that this was a bigger number. EMS had requested to do this at every post. But after facilities was able to come in and get an evaluation from our on-call vendor, we thought that we just need to replace their condensers, furnaces, and evaporator coils at these 3 posts, 2, 4, and 6. So much smaller number than what you last saw. Next one is another one that I'm probably going to bungle, and I'm glad that our facilities friends are here. At the adult detention facility, there's a generator parallel switchgear modernization project that's requested. So basically, in little people words, my understanding is that means the generator can talk to the main system and be ready to go if and when it fails. So you might recall that there are 2 on the north and there are 2 on the south side of the jail. Those 2 on the south side have already been updated. So this just is focusing on the 2 on the north side. And so this paralleling switchgear will have the equipment that controls and regulates the generators to synchronize together. And it's important because if a generator doesn't start or breaks down, that other generator will carry the load. Obviously, there's big concerns because these are inmates who are in our custody and we have liability for. And so we need to ensure that there's appropriate climate control, especially in nice Kansas summers or nice Kansas winters. So what have I said that's done?
Good.
Okay, I read my notes well. Questions on this one? Okay. Moving to the next one. This is a brand new one to the project list this year, and this is the fire district training facility. And again, I'm very glad my fire district friends are here to answer questions. So there are 4 phases that go into this fire district training facility. 3 of those phases basically create a site to be used to train, I would say, active fire fighting. It wouldn't allow for the classroom training, those 3 phases. The 4th phase would construct an actual training facility on the site that would provide that classroom training as well. This would be constructed on land that's already been donated to Sedgwick County. It would establish basically concrete pads for what they call Connex boxes, which is how you essentially build simulated structures to fight fires in. It also would, those first 3 phases would basically prepare the site with utilities and other things in order to construct a facility down the road. Right now, there is a lot of congestion at other fire district training, or not fire district, fire training sites, whether you're talking about Wichita Fire. I think Hutch had come up in some conversation. So right now, all of these various fire departments rely on a kind of a small system of structures that can be used. And because we don't have any of those, we are typically in last place when it comes to scheduling that. And as we hear about the Wichita Fire Department growing in size, as we hear about other community fire folks growing in size, that means more training. As we hear about, unfortunate, tragic and accidents that are out there, that's going to increase the level of training that's required even of existing firefighters, not just recruits. And so there are pressures on a system that apparently cannot be met with our current infrastructure. And so originally, I think the committee was comfortable moving forward with a recommendation just to do the Connex boxes and saving the facility down the road. Putting that part on the watch list. But I think after further conversation with fire district folks earlier this week, what we've heard is there's enough congestion, enough other problems, creating a barrier on the current Wichita fire site that we don't necessarily see an opportunity to expand, even if the future of fire training is trying to be merged. This would add structures into a system that allows the whole system to use. And so now the training facility is included in this total cost estimate. And so I am certain there will be questions and conversation about this. So I would encourage my fire friends to start moving to the front of the room.
So a couple questions. This is cash funded from fire district. For those that will be listening at home, we can't borrow from the general fund. We can't bond out of this. So the question comes to, can they afford this?
Absolutely, they can.
You're comfortable?
Yes. So they have what the commission, well, let me back up. I'm comfortable with this if this is a priority for the commission. They have cash that has been set aside over the years out of their general fund and their special equipment fund. That would be the source of the funds here. Now, those funds would take a serious hit if the commission chose to move forward with this, but there is more than enough there to cover it. As long as this is the priority, not trying to cash fund big pieces of equipment or anything like that, then yes, I'm comfortable.
So when we talk about priority, I've seen the current infrastructure used for training, but I want to talk about risk management. Have they weighed in on the need for?
They have weighed in on the need for adequate training. I know they have been already working closely with the fire district to improve some of the training mechanisms. Have I asked them point blank if they think this facility is necessary? No, but we sure can.
Okay. Well, I guess that's the question that I have is just from a liability, from a management standpoint, a risk standpoint. I get the sense, I feel that the training piece of this is crucial to the health of the fire district, not just the fire department. So I want to make sure that, but I'd love risk management's, I'd love their thumbs up on that opinion.
And Chairman Brad Crisp, Sedgwick County Fire District 1 Fire Marshal. We have had those discussions with our partners in risk management during previous training cycles, previous recruit classes. And there's a lot that goes into that discussion. So when you're looking at fire training as a whole, or specifically fire recruit training, there's a level of expectation for your recruit instructors to have certifications and training and certain types of stopgaps and things in place to avoid dehydration or injuries and things of that nature. It's not that we don't have those things, but frequently, especially with recruit training, we are bringing people in off of the floor, out of their fire station, and providing 12 weeks to 14 weeks of training to our recruits. That's taking them out of their station and out of their actual role as firefighters or lieutenants or captains. They aren't spending their entire life in the training field, getting the training certifications and things that could be used to help model a professional training model like what we need to help manage some of those things like injuries and whatnot. So risk management continues to be a good partner. I think we do need to do what you've suggested and probably get some official input from them. But this is one of the things that I'm sure that they would be supportive of.
Okay. Other questions?
I'm just curious, y'all have said that the Wichita Regional Fire Training Center is basically, it's extremely busy. There's not really a way to use that. Is there land there near their site to expand the classrooms and add training aids there on their property? And there's baseball fields to the north of that. I'm not sure if those are even utilized anymore. There's a big piece of property there that I think it's government owned, but I don't know how used that property is.
There is some land up there that's owned by the city of Wichita. And so there's a couple of elements to think about, and we've been in discussion with our partners across the street. The current RTC facility is experiencing growth. We just got to look at their CIP plans and their future growth and expanding their campus, or at least the capabilities on their campus. And their plan is to use all the land that they have existing in place right now. They just moved some of their infrastructure off of their site and moved it about a mile north up on GWB, which tells me that they don't have enough room to do the things that they want to do. The city of Wichita does own land to the north. I believe it's not part of the park department, but perhaps part of the city of Wichita. And I think that we would be open to the discussion about them perhaps deeding some of that land over to the fire district and us having a campus or having a footprint there. We obviously already have land in our own footprint within our own space down just 2 miles south of the current RTC site. I think that's open for discussion as well. We're absolutely open to location discussions in a campus type approach discussion. The ask today isn't necessarily for us to say we are going to build only on this site, but rather to start and get funding in place so that we can develop our training processes and practices.
Just looking backwards about 15 years ago, I'm disappointed that when the RTC Regional Training Center was built, it was really not intended to be regional. It was really for Wichita. And there are other fire departments around the county, even beyond our borders, that would like to have a training opportunity. That we ought to talk about shared services and functional consolidation. I think this is the lowest hanging fruit we have. And if we're gonna invest $4 million, we ought to have those conversations to invite partners in and see what we can do that provides more fire training. And I'm not sure that site is the ideal site, because I'm not sure what kind of burns you can do there without causing trouble to neighborhoods that are not too far away. So I know that there was a plan 20 years ago that had a different site out west. And anyway, I'm not against, making sure we have a way to train. I think what we have right now is not adequate, but I'm disappointed that the regional training center is not really regional. And I think if we're going to go down this path, we ought to maybe have another regional training center, but this time actually make it regional. Thanks.
Well, Brad and I are both old enough to remember 2001 for the regional training center, and that failed. I'll sum it up. It failed due to lack of communication and partnership. So we have a shot here again. The chief and fire district, we won't let it fail because of community. We will talk about this. I think what Chief Crisp has talked about is the next step in this discussion, but things don't get done because partners don't talk, and we're not going to let that happen this time.
And actually, when I first became a commissioner, I went and talked to the as many people as I could to get some of the history of that. And I think there was one side that was willing and interested, the other side wasn't. And it was, I'll just say it was very, I mean, they knew there was an opportunity, but they did not want to do
No,
it.
you are exactly correct. And there has to be political will from all parties.
Right.
City, county, and ancillary departments that want to take part in this. There has to be political will. So that's.
So I'd like to cast a net and just say to everyone, if you want to have a regional training center, this is your chance to step up. And my vision would be that the funding would be shared, should say the cost would be shared based on usage. And again, I'd like to see everyone's name on the building, everyone have a key, or you have a training manager that provides training opportunities to everybody who's a partner. But it should be done. Thanks.
Any other questions on this one? The 27, we're talking about some of this stuff here pretty recent. Is this, I don't know if you addressed it being in 27, this didn't need to be in a 26?
When we had contemplated this at a CIP discussion, it was okay to put this there. I don't think it's ideal, but again, we have to manage project loads.
Understood. Okay, that makes sense. All right, Chief Chris, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, the next one is another new project for the CIP consideration this year. It is contemplated to be bond funded. It would be in the second year of the plan. And this is for the adult detention facility booking and property space right there. If you're a bad guy and you enter the jail, an alleged bad guy and you enter the jail, this is where they receive you, scan you, take your property, do all of that. And so what they have been able to share with us, in addition to some photos that I unfortunately did not include here, would be that these areas are the only part of the jail that hasn't been renovated since it was constructed, or this space was renovated in 1998. There's not great sight lines for the folks who are working the booking desk. The new word I've learned lately is bananas. And if you remember the Gwen Stefani song. So they have shown us photos of what and told us stories about how they're, yeah, we can play it later. We'll have a walk-in song maybe. But they are storing, I mean, sometimes inmates don't come in maybe with the cleanest of materials. And so they're putting these things in one big area and the stench is remarkable. Bananas, one might say. So they are looking for some opportunities to do something that would be, I think, maybe feel more hygienic, smell better, relieve some of the obligation for the folks who actually have to work in that space, in addition to, most importantly, improving the safety for the folks who are in custody so that deputies can see them at all times and so that deputies are never in a position where they have to turn their backs on inmates who are in that space. So this is about $1.9 million. They're going to do an efficiency study as a part of this to make sure they figure out what is the best way forward. But I know Kendall has indicated that he's already, our friend Kendall, who's just making all kinds of appearances this week, has talked with the jail folks. They have a pretty good idea of what they want to do. So this is another one that, but for all of the other competing projects that are in category 1, probably would have made it as a category 1. But again, relative to other priorities, this made it as a category 2. So any questions on that I can answer. Okay, the next is another big one. This is the last big one we're going to talk about from a facility side today, and that is the Emergency Preparedness Center. You have heard much about this over the years. We have tried 3 times to get a grant, a federal grant, to go for this. The last time we really thought we had a great shot. It was site ready. We had all 3 commanders at McConnell Air Force Base signed a letter of support. And basically the feedback that we received at the time was it wasn't enough support to the military base to qualify for that funding. But we know, based on what you've heard from 911, that there is true need for 911 to take over the space in the public safety building. That means we must get emergency management out. This is a plan that takes care of that. We also have been borrowing space at Rounds and Porter. It's highly inefficient. The way they are using this, it was supposed to be a temporary solution during COVID. It has not turned out that way. So this would provide permanent warehouse space for those folks in a much more efficient manner. And of course, what we've talked about and we realize still probably will want to have further discussion with commissioners is the health component part of this that would allow us to have that public health response if necessary. So recognizing that COVID was not, I mean, while it was an anomaly in its scale, H1N1, SARS, and things like that have been things we've dealt with historically. And while we don't know what the federal government will do, it does appear that more of emergency response is going to be pushed down to locals, and we want to make sure we're prepared to respond to that in whatever form or fashion that looks like. So what you see here is the total cost of the project over and above, I think it's over and above the land, right? That we've already paid for.
So I'll add a couple things. Yeah, we've already purchased land for this project, so we own that. And whether or not you want to use that land for something else or not, you certainly can. However, we already have construction documents ready for bidding for a contractor to build on this site. So we would have to do that differently if we move this program somewhere else. Our project budget also includes putting in part of a street, stormwater, water, sewer, utilities, natural gas, all of that in the street infrastructure. So your specials that would typically apply to a project, that won't happen here. That's already built into the project budget.
And this is like FEMA approved. I mean, this is not just a building, right? That's part of the price tag as well.
There is a portion of the building that has a FEMA rating to it. So that'd be the EOC portion and the rest of it's not.
And for those new in the room, EOC is Emergency Operations Center. That's convened when there are crises of any size or standard. So
And-
mostly looking at.
And we still have,
Scott.
sorry to be a little late to this, but that we still have a chance for federal funding
So
through Senator Moran's office that is obligating to.
I know that we have told him, I know Tom has relayed that it would be a priority. Knowing what's happening at the federal level right now, I will be skeptical if it makes it very far, but we are still keeping the DCIP grant on the radar. It is open for reapplication. Carrie in our office is going to go to their kind of NOFO announcement and try and see if there's any opportunities for us to pursue it. So we're still trying to keep every pathway open. I'm just less
That's the
confident.
only grant opportunity that would exist. I mean, there's some.
With FEMA being pared down as much it is.
There
Yes,
was two pieces, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. There was two pieces to this. There was a grant and then we are still on queue. We just re-upped for the Moran appropriation money.
Yes.
Two projects, ARC 95 plus this. So we just re-upped on that, like real time, like this week. But I do think I'm with Lindsay on the DOD money. I just think I don't think that's going to happen.
I shouldn't bank on that. They were saying we're just going forward. If we get fortunate later on, so be it.
so right, because what we know is if we want 911 to be able to take over that building, we have to get emergency management and the EOC out. And so that's kind of what's triggered this timeline. Again, recognizing that Regional Forensic Science Center is the higher priority, so it's funded earlier in the plan. But certainly with the Emergency Preparedness Center, you can see that this is, well, you can't see, but if I was smart, you would see that there were actually 2 asterisks by this, which means that we're anticipating bond funding for it. So that's a mistake on my part on this, but it is included in your debt service forecast. And so we would not anticipate to issue bonds until 2029 for this. So we have plenty of time to pursue other funding options.
Okay.
Respectful, can you give me a quick summary? What did we decide on the fire district training?
We're going to workshop it.
Okay.
So you decided nothing. You want more information.
No, that's okay. Yeah, just thank you.
If anyone else wants to talk more on that, feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to skip forward, recognizing you still have your road and bridge stuff to go through and you got a hard stop in 30 minutes. I know you're desperate to talk about roads and
I
bridges.
love it.
Okay.
And if I just, so are you gonna go to that as well? You don't, you guys can continue if I just said,
I'm staying, so
it doesn't matter.
we'll work it out.
Okay, and then you can watch later.
District 3 certainly wants to be a part of the road and bridge discussion.
Yeah, District 1, but for Bel Air, we're pretty good.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Did I get through? Yes. So we got through that slide. So now we're on the final 3 projects of category 2. So again, still in your blue section. Now what you'll see are projects that are in the 3rd year of your CIP proposal. So adult residential shower replacements, the plan would be to replace 24 of the 27 stalls, the controls, the shower heads, the tile and grout, all of that. It would involve some major plumbing, but these have been in place at the adult residential facility. So folks who are probably not taking the greatest care of our assets for 24 years. And so this is something that I think they wish would be done sooner because of the maintenance work that's involved. But again, just relative to other priorities, we would propose to cash fund this in 2028. Next would be EMS video surveillance at their 17 posts. So they are requesting surveillance cameras and a monitoring system for all of their posts to incorporate into the existing surveillance system that goes back to the main courthouse. And that primarily, I mean, it's definitely a safety issue, but it's definitely more about vandalism and theft for those folks who are kind of at these facilities. They leave their cars, they go out on ambulances. There's no one there to really watch it. So not necessarily the life safety need. We did do some proxy cards, some access controls this year is a more urgent need, but this is just something to try and improve employee safety. And then the final one on this list is something that again has come up from last year. I think it was 2008, the county did a comprehensive ADA evaluation to see how our facilities withstood that analysis. We know that there are still some lingering things that have not been done, but we also know that there is a lot of CIP work happening now that's going to change the landscape. And so the idea would be to fund an additional study to come back through and identify those issues that after all of the CIP work that we've done has hopefully caught a lot of those, to catch anything else that still remains. And then eventually there will be additional funding over and above this to bring those places up into ADA compliance. So we don't see it as like a super high liability at this point. So that's why it's in an outer year, but we do think it's important to make sure we're compliant and accessible. So for your category 2, still not particularly cheap, but much less expensive than your category 1 at about $27 million.
So in year 28, are we projecting a $55 million investments total between 1 and 2, category 1 and 2?
But a lot of that, remember, is bond funding and also that ComCare project that's going to be paid with debt proceeds that are reimbursed by PPS1 revenues. And again, remember my masterclass brilliance that I told you at the beginning, your financial forecast actually looks better at the end of this recommendation than what Lorian showed you last week. Woo, okay.
Better can always get better.
Better can always get better. You're exactly right. I love not spending money.
We know.
Okay, so now hey now, don't be mean. Okay, final funded projects in this tentative recommended CIP would be these 2. So Extension Office had been included last year in a grander scope than what we are proposing to you in this one. Essentially, there are some issues with paving, fixing a pergola that's can be, I guess, dangerous potentially to some people walking in. What we have removed, though, are the restroom finishes. So last year, you may recall there were a couple $100,000 in there to update their bathroom and all of the finishes throughout the building. That has been removed. We're not really doing aesthetic improvements for any part of the organization in this plan. And so we don't know that that's equitable to then do it for extension. So that's that one. And then Tanya's very favorite thing is the project that has moved from 29 to 2030. And you know that we have FEMA parcels that we own that no one wants to buy from us, unfortunately. And so we have obligations to keep those in reasonably decent shape. We have some neighbors who are complaining. So just having this in the CIP, making sure it's on the radar helps communicate that message to citizens.
Tanya, would you send out remind me of the addresses, just email what the addresses are. We can throw some goats out there.
There's
It might be
24,
easy.
just so you know.
Or just throw goats out. Goats.
Can we relocate it to the northeast?
Relocate the FEMA.
But
portal.
if you could send those addresses again,
Okay, folks, all right, regrouping. Always thinking, always at that high level. Forget Lake Pete, it's going to be goat grazing ground. Okay. So this is the watch list. So what this means is it's on our radar. We didn't outright say no to it, but we also either don't have enough information or it's not yet ripe to be considered for actual funding. So you'll see many of these have been on the plan for a long time. Many of them are parks. Again, this doesn't mean that we won't pay for park improvements after we get the results of the master plan. It just means we don't know what those highest priorities will be yet. So keep that in mind. I'm not going to go through the rest of these. I'm going to give you approximately 20 seconds to read the list yourselves
Yep.
and tell me.
I know
if you have
Rusty's not here,
questions.
but if someone, I doubt anybody knows this off the top of their head, but where is post 4 for EMS?
It's the one at Via Christi St. Joe.
Okay. Needs to be renovated.
We actually,
It's been provided.
We
Do you want
bought
me to read my
a couple
notes?
years ago, maybe Chairman wasn't on the bench yet.
No, I don't remember this.
It
We bought it,
serves,
but it's too small and our current ambulances don't, they're too big for it. We have to remodel.
says the current facility is a one-bay garage with small crew quarters and office. The request is to acquire property and construct a new facility with 2 bays and adequate office space and crew quarters for 2 ambulances and staff. You're welcome.
Is this different land or is this the same space?
The request that they have submitted would include new land.
Yeah, I would just like to say, I wish it was less than basically nearly $2 million. That's
Understood.
a lot for what, again, we've got to get the cost down. Thanks.
Well, it's on the watch list now, so it's no cost right now.
Can I make a note of explanation sometime? I think we just spent a lot of money at the main courthouse.
Mhm.
Why are they needing another 5 million?
They want to redo the rest of the courthouse to bring it up to the same standard that the new courtrooms look like.
Well,
That's
thank
why
you
it's on the watch list.
Thank you for putting on the watch list. Not in the category. My perspective.
Station 37, that's up by 70.
Bel Air. At my
that one.
house, I drive by it.
Okay, so that one, I'd like to workshop that a little bit too.
Well, and we've got the
Station
fire
37.
folks here. I think part of what the reasoning for putting it on the watch list is they're still waiting to kind of see what happens with some of the development that's proposed to happen out in Bel Air. To
If
make
we
sure
haven't-
they're
if
locating
commissioners haven't
properly.
Looked at that, they ought to go out and take a look at the building. And again, I probably disagree with the idea that relocating that, we want to put stations where they're most needed, but close is, being close is probably reasonable if you save money. That building, I believe, has some issues, but I think it could be repaired for a whole lot less money. So we just need to talk about that. Thank you.
Okay. So do you want to workshop that as a part of this budget process, or could that come later since it's on the watch list?
Maybe later after budget
Okay.
options. fine.
That'd be great because time's going to be limited. So I appreciate you letting us do that. Thank you, sir. Okay, so Commissioner Howell jumped forward to the next slide, so I'm going to jump forward to that slide in case you weren't looking at your PowerPoint. And I do want to call attention to the one just above District Station 37, and that is the Health Department KU Med Building. So that would seek to consolidate the 9th Street property and the West Central Clinic into the KU Med facility, but we don't know timeline and we don't know dollars. And so we know that this is something that's definitely a priority. We think we've heard from the commission that it's a path forward that we'd like to explore, but we just don't have those details for you yet. So with that, unless you have any other questions on watch list, we are going to cover grand totals. This is a $107 million facility and drainage request. Of that, the vast majority is to be funded with bond proceeds, and at least half of that is proposed to be repaid with those revenues from the ComCare model. Cash funding is not insignificant. It's $21 million. I don't want to jump ahead too far because I am going to come back to talk about the overall funding after you hear about roads and bridges too. But again, the bottom line on this is your forecast is improving. Commissioner or Chairman Beatty, you had asked during the retreat about optimal level of bonding. And when we get to that slide later, I think I'm going to have a good answer for you.
Okay,
so
good.
you might hold, if that's something you're thinking about.
It's
you might
not.
give me
I was going to email you that question, but
Oh.
I do have a question about, because I'm very intrigued on the ComCare campus workshop we're going to have and the rebasing. And Tim, you might be able to help me with this. This conversation at the CCBHC funds and the reimbursement rate, and we're accumulating rather significant balance in that account. And I understand that balance is going to be stressed because of the things we have coming. The idea behind that rate is that it gets put back into the community, correct? I mean, this is not, that's the idea with the increased reimbursement rate is it is intended to get put back into services and put back into infrastructure for the system.
For that population, for the Medicaid
Specific
population.
for that population.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about this conversation that when she says that, you know, this isn't going to be property tax funded, the bulk of what we're seeing up there bond funded to be reimbursed by that. We are inclined to put that back into the community.
It's a very appropriate use of that funding to spend it on facilities. That is how facilities across the country are going to be.
Yeah, I've seen it. I'm aware of that. So I just mark a note that when we workshop, I think we need to really understand what I believe to probably be the mandate of how we utilize these funds. We need to think about reinvestment back into the community. Okay, thanks.
All right. My name is Daniel Schrant. I'm the Deputy Director of Sedgwick County Public Works, and I'm here to talk about our road and bridge CIP. All right, just to give you a quick refresher, I know you've heard this year, but I put up some totals for what infrastructure it is that we maintain. We're clearly off the 600 road miles and 600 bridges. We had some roads annexed. Those bridges should be coming down as well once we get those off the system. Those are still on our system if they were on those annex roads until we get with KDOT and get those removed. But that just gives you an idea of what we have out there. All right, so compared to how we ran the last bit of the CIP, where we went project by project through the list, we've put these into different types of categories. So our categories are maintenance, enhancements, expansions, and quality of place. So maintenance is going to include projects, for instance, asphalt overlays of our road. It also includes the majority of all of our bridge replacements. So those are under the maintenance requirement because we are replacing bridges that are generally in poor condition. Enhancements are projects that include significant improvements to the project. So a lot of our road improvements and road upgrades are in that category beyond just regular overlays. Expansion projects increase significant capacity on highways in the area. And so you'll find when we get to those slides, that's going to be mostly KDOT projects that we're putting money into. And then finally, quality of place, that's where we're putting our pedestrian and bicycle facilities into that category. All right, so some of our changes, we are taking into account funding, how that is changing with labor and material costs going up. We've added 6 new projects in there. We've removed the Calfskin Creek watershed project due to a lack of funding. We were working on that with the city of Wichita, and then also working with the federal government. Just didn't get the traction to where we felt we should keep it in there at this point. And then finally, I'd just like to highlight the partnerships that we have on these projects that we have in the CIP. We've partnered with all of these organizations on those projects for funding. And then I'd also say we even work outside the CIP on partnerships. So we're currently down in the city of Derby working on the Nelson Drive and K-15 project. And then we're also on a second Valley Center project where we're doing the same thing and partnering with them there. All right, our first category was maintenance. The big one here is R175. That's our annual road maintenance project. It includes the overlays and everything that we do in that system. So keep in mind that this is over 5 years. So that $55 million, that's $11 million per year. And then R134, that is just $200,000 per year. And then R264, that goes towards replacing culverts underneath our roads and some smaller bridges that we can complete with in-house crews. Sticking inside the maintenance category, on our bridges, I'll just highlight a few things here. We have the Seneca Bridge that's located between Wichita and the city of Hayesville. We're getting 80% funding through WAMPO on that project. We also have 27 bridge projects. And again, I'm not going to go through all of them. You can see them in the handouts that I provided, but I'll highlight just a few of them. First, B503. That's a project out on 21st Street, adjacent to Cheney Reservoir. And I'll just point out that we've added in our grant funding that we had on that one. We got funding from the Kansas Local Bridge Improvement Program last year on that one. It's the second largest grant in the state that we got on that. And then B528, that has been included in our CIP for a while. And when we were looking at the city of Wichita CIP, we realized that our projects overlapped. They were doing some road improvements on 21st Street. We had planned to replace this bridge on 21st Street. So we're partnering with them to make that into a combined project. And so that will end up really well. And so that project is now coordinated between our two organizations. So it's in the same year. And then the final project I'll highlight is the one bridge project that we added this year. And that was project B548. It's on Trail and Drive. It's in a neighborhood. So it's not on any of the section line roads. That will be a little bit of a difficult project because there are several homes on a cul-de-sac that only have access to their houses by going over this one single bridge. And so we'll have to work hard to make sure everyone can get home during construction on that one. And then I'd also just point out, because we tend to take such good care of our infrastructure, when we were doing all of our annexation discussions last year, this came up over and over again with the cities. They were taking over roads. They asked about the bridges. What condition is that bridge in? And fortunately, we were always able to say that bridge is in good condition. We didn't hand over anything, or we're not going to hand over anything that was in poor condition. All right. Enhancements. So again, enhancements are projects that we're generally usually making safety improvements on, or improving the overall condition of the road, not just maintenance. So to highlight a few of the projects, MacArthur Safety Road Improvements, we have a high-risk rural road grant on that project. That project is on the border between Commissioner Bluebaugh and Commissioner Wise's district. And so that is in the CIP for 2026. The Meridian 93rd Street Drainage Project, I'm pointing that one out because that is a partnership with Valley Center. And so this is the last year we're putting money into that. So you'll see we have 500,000 on there. It's a 50-50 split between the two. That's because we have put money in the past years into that project. So that finishes up the money that would be necessary to meet our max contribution to that project. We also have the intersection improvements at 21st and 167th. And notably, that is just improvements at this point. It could be a signalized intersection, could be a roundabout. Last year, it was in the CIP as a roundabout, but we have opened that up so that it's not just a roundabout at that
But
location.
you mentioned the R word, so I want to ask, and Lynn, your opinion. What is your view on roundabouts versus four-way stops? And I know in my district, Valley Center is throwing these things up like candy at a parade. There's a roundabout here and a roundabout there. I mean, what's your thoughts on some of these things?
In general, I'm a huge fan of roundabouts. You go from 32 conflict points to 8 conflict points.
That's why we
None of
ask an
those-
engineer.
None of those conflict points are right angle crashes. They're all side swipes. So it's incredibly safer than any signalized intersection out there. However, I'll also note that there's a place, for everything. And you don't want to put a square block in a round hole for an old saying. You need to find the right location for them. We know that KDOT, as well as other municipalities throughout the state, have proven that agricultural vehicles, larger double trailer trucks, they can all handle roundabouts.
Yeah.
They can be built for that. They have new styles of roundabouts. So one of the ones I'm really hot on right now is a turbo roundabout, which is different than you would think that means. It doesn't mean the speed increases, but it allows for multi-lane thoroughfare without going through the Griswold European vacation circular.
Yeah, that's right.
So really hot on those. But like I said, you just need to find.
Here's what I'm asking is I know that we are investing into some signals and some four-way stops in some areas. I mean, are we doing that from a cost standpoint because it's just a cost savings and maybe one day this will have a roundabout in the intersection and we're just going to do that at another time? Or should we be prioritizing the roundabouts if this is where our county engineer thinks that we should be heading?
You're going to see roundabouts in the near future.
Okay.
My goal is to definitely have them in there while I'm the county engineer. Again, is trying to find the right fit for the location. Just throwing one up because that's the next one that's going to be a signalized intersection. Instead of doing that, we're going to do a roundabout isn't necessarily the right way to go about it. We want to make sure we're doing it right.
Okay. Appreciate that. Okay. Thanks. You said the R word, so I wanted to talk about it.
All right. Then the last project I have on here is the Oliver traffic signal improvement. This is adjacent to Spirit, which is why they're partnering with us. And so just wanted to highlight that. And those are all good projects. Moving on to further enhancements to our road system. We have a total of 6 road reconstruction projects for $17.1 million. So a road reconstruction project, this is where we will be removing the existing asphalt and going back with asphalt. So not only that, because it needs to be totally rebuilt, but there will be other enhancements that go along with it. Typically, we'll be replacing some bridges along the route, depending on the project. Shoulders will be added. There'll be ditches regraded. It'll kind of encompass the whole right of way on those projects. And then I've also highlighted which gravel roads are going to be paved according to the CIP. And so I've highlighted every project in there that we currently have in the CIP that would be a paving project. Notably, all of these projects have at least design money or have already had design money in them, but not all of them have construction funding in them. We want to be a little bit flexible on that. We're watching development, see how that occurs. And so, for instance, there's a couple of roads up here where we have seen sketch plats of what people are wanting to do along these roads. And if that development were to move forward, it would definitely require paving at that point, but we've seen nothing more than a sketch plat. So we'd want to see more development on some of these roads. All right, road expansions. Like I mentioned earlier, these are all KDOT projects on KDOT highways. So first, I've got the Northwest Expressway listed here. So we've been putting $1 million per year into this project. And then I would just note that that final bullet point under the Northwest Expressway is that we do need a new right-of-way agreement with KDOT to get into the next year. So that will be a discussion this summer. And whatever comes out of that, it will eventually come to the BOCC. But we are accounting for an additional $1 million per year in the CIP.
And the state's doing a new study on that to validate whether that should stay on the list, right?
Correct.
When's that study gonna be completed?
That is unknown yet. The scope has not been set, but I don't expect that before the end of the year. So we're gonna have to have some discussions here this summer with KDOT about, whether we do another 5-year or we do an interim 1 year and then go into a 5-year based on, or a multi-year, I guess I should say, based on the study. So we're still having those conversations with KDOT.
I just, for this existing budget cycle, if we don't know for sure we're doing this, I'd hate to put another $1 million in this year.
And that's something that we're cognizant of. We're hoping, like I said, this summer, we're hoping to have, before we need to go through and make final decisions, have an understanding where KDOT sits with it as well as the commission to figure a number for at least 2026. And the numbers for 27 through 30 are planning numbers.
Good, thanks.
So we also have a couple more KDOT projects in here. We have the East Kellogg project that takes off from K96 and then goes into Butler County. And then we also have the K96 improvements. And then the funding on all these projects would be using our federal fund exchange dollars, which are dollars that we control, but we're designating that those dollars go to these projects. Those federal funds exchange, we could apply to other projects. Sometimes we've had that in R175 in the past, but you do lose 10% of the funds if they come from KDOT to us. So if we're going to be funding KDOT projects, using federal funds exchange is the first choice.
Hey, Daniel, is KDOT talking anything about West Kellogg? I know you get 119th out to 167th. It's pretty wild out that way. It's the Wild West. Are they talking about these things?
It is on their radar. The city of Wichita is really pushing for that. They've had designs done 3 different times since 2005, I think. And they're just looking to get into that construction corridor or kind of construction pipeline. I know that it's something that they're discussing with the other projects that are going on here in Wichita, which in the metro area right now, there are quite a few big dollar projects trying to figure out, and also just trying to figure out how does West Kellogg play with Northwest Expressway.
That's right. That's why that matters. And hopefully that study will help. Well, I don't know if it will address that, but it should at the very least.
If it doesn't directly address it directly, it'll at least give us an idea of how those two are going to interact.
That's what we're looking for. Thanks.
Yeah, I would say with all of these KDOT projects, including the West Kellogg project, it would be important for our community to have really good participation at the local consult when KDOT comes down here. We've seen that that's driven a lot of their decisions.
Daniel,
Yes.
Lynn, I need to depart, but I'll just make a briefest comment as I really appreciate the, as you get into evaluation on priorities on these roads, especially the gravel slide that you had, that's very valuable, how you are scoring it, so to speak. And maybe there's improvements to be made in the scoring process. I have no idea, but just the fact that we're doing that is really, really helpful for me as we get questioned about it. So it's
very good.
So thank you.
I will note, definitely look at the District 1. We have 6 District 1 projects in this next CIP, one of which is a new project. So definitely take a look at that. Let us know if you have any questions.
Okay.
But that's what we have planned right now for District 1 that is currently in there. A couple of them are the big KDOT projects as well, but
okay. I've kind
have
of
conversations with
I
you.
perused through the rest of your deal, so I don't have any big questions, but thank you and apologize for that. I need to bolt out.
Okay. Pete's representing the commission of a deal, so it's
All right. Quality of place. I mentioned this is our category for pedestrian and bicycle facilities. We have 2 projects. Both of these have federal funding in them, and they've gone through WAMPO. The second project listed on here not only is going through WAMPO, but we're partnering with Butler County on that project. So that's significant. So we don't have a sidewalk that just goes to the county line and ends. It's nice that it's going into Rose Hill. So there's a destination at the end of that. So that project is going well. We're splitting the engineering fees on that project 50-50 with Butler County. And then we'll be providing the inspection services on that one. And so here's a breakdown of where all of these dollars are going based on the category that we had. So you can kind of see where our priorities lie. We're maintaining our system. Here are the fund sources. Obviously, local sales tax dollars. That's the big contributor to our funding. We have the federal exchange dollars that we get. And I think that's going to be decreasing incrementally year over year. And we've actually shown that in the CIP. So we're trying to do our best to forecast that. We don't even, as of right now, we don't have the amount for this year that we're expecting to receive in 2026. So they're going to get that number to us. And then finally, bonding, which we held consistent at $4 million per year. So funding opportunities. Listed a few things here. Obviously, we're working through WAMPO all the time to get projects done. ARC 95, we have listed on here in 2 different spots. We're trying to get it congressionally directed spending through Senator Moran's office. We've also applied for raise grants on that project. I think we're making progress in both of those areas. We were shortlisted the previous year for the raise grant. We didn't receive it at the end of the day, but we were given additional consideration on that one. Finally, the KDOT competitive grant funding. I did mention B503 last year was the second largest grant in the state. The largest grant was 1.9 million, so we weren't far off of that. And then just yesterday at the BOCC meeting, you guys approved a couple more grant applications that would go towards bridges. And then finally, the project on MacArthur for the high-risk rural road project. So our next steps is we will take this to MAPC to make sure it fits with a comprehensive plan. Well, it needs to go to advanced plans and then the full MAPC.
Okay. While she's walking up, you're fine. I'm just, when is the KDOT big, what's that? What do they call this thing where we go and put things on the board? And
That's a local consult. That'll
Yeah,
be
that
this
one.
fall.
okay, that's in the fall. Okay.
The exact date escapes me, but I can get that over to you.
Well, let's figure out what KDOT projects that you think we should be contending for strategically and
I'll have a
prioritizing.
list for you.
Okay, good. Okay. Thank you so much.
Any other questions at this point?
Commissioner?
Just some of these projects, I guess I'm just wondering about equity. I mean, for example, there's a path out by Eisenhower School Complex. I've been talking about putting some kind of a sidewalk or something out by Southeast High School. We had a kid got hit by a car when that school was kind of new, and Kristen McCollum School has a very similar problem. I think in terms of collaboration between the school system, the city, and the county, because these are kind of rural areas, we ought to, see if we can get a partnership going on some of these. But Eisenhower School is getting an enhancement, but the other schools I know have a need, and I'm not sure if they're ever going to get on this list or not.
Big schools.
And I know we put a little bit of money into ARC 95 already. And I don't see on the list right now that there's a plan to continue to fund that. It's not on the list right now. I just have I guess I'm saying, if we don't address these things in this plan, how solid does it get down the road? Is it harder and harder to make adjustments to this if we don't deal with it? These types of details may be farther out, but if you don't deal with it today, does it start getting more solid and more difficult to change it if you don't?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the nice thing about a 5-year CIP. Really what's solid is what's going to be in 2026. Anything beyond that, the BOCC is working with us. Things can move, things can change. We always kind of say that the first 2 years we lock in fair, as you go down the list, they're fairly solid, but years 3, 4, and 5, especially year 5, is very fluid. A lot, as Daniel mentioned when he was presenting, we have times where development doesn't occur where we thought it was going to be popping up next, or it pops up where we weren't expecting it. And we have to adjust to account for that. So that happens a lot. I do know that the city of Wichita has plans for 143rd in front of Crystal McAuliffe. And they have been in on the meetings with the right turn lane issues there at when school gets in and out. And then they currently have all the right of way around Southeast High School. And they are in the process of, with their next project, annexing the rest of Pawnee out there. So I think that we can definitely have conversations with them and find out what their plans all include.
And there, we didn't really cover it directly, but there's other handout that you guys gave us. How the projects and funding sources, it's got the years across the top and a blue line, and projects are listed by bridges and by roads. Then out towards the bottom, there's a summary. And it talks about how much deck area per year, and it talks about projects by commission district. And then I noticed you get down to District 5, it's missing.
So say that one more time.
On page 3,
Okay.
third page, there's a summary, projects by commission district.
Oh. I will have it to you by the time I get back to the office. I have it on there. I believe.
I can't tell you, you have the second, next to District 3, you have the most projects. I believe the number is 8 or 9, but I can't confirm that.
I've gone through and circled them all, so I kind of know.
I protest.
Yeah, I thought it was 7 or 8. It's on my chart. I think it just got cut off.
I'm a shared between District 1 and 5, but if you count all the 5s on there, there's 8 total. That's bridges and roads together.
Okay. So you mentioned Kristen McCullough School. Lynn mentioned that, the city of Wichita has been involved in some projects down there. As far as a bike path or a sidewalk down there, we did construct a bridge maybe 5 years ago along 143rd Street, directly adjacent to it. And we did leave space for a sidewalk on that bridge so that it would be easily expandable if Wichita includes a sidewalk in their improvements. The project south of Pawnee, that is a county maintained road. And actually that road is in the CIP to go from gravel to paved. The bridge was recently completed, and we did leave space on that bridge as well to have a sidewalk put in on the east side of the road.
And then I'll just say also, I think the summary should all, and I'm not saying it has to be equal, obviously, because it's not going to happen that way. But it'd be nice to see I'm not sure that you want to do it this way, but it'd be nice to see like years 1 through 5 or 26 through 30 totals by district. And then maybe a total for each district for 5 years. I can do it myself, but I'd rather have someone else. So you have on the spreadsheet, I'm assuming. It'd be easy to just add.
Yeah, I have that table on a separate sheet.
I'm not arguing it has to be equal. I'm just arguing, I guess what I want, the differences will be obvious, but I guess if there is I guess I just say it's good information to have that. That's all I'm saying.
While Lindsay's walking up, I'm transitioning for you. But this WIMPO is working a program, and I'm helping with May's schools, Commissioner Howe, on the sidewalk stuff called Safe Schools, the Safe Schools grant. It's legit, and May's just starting, and we're trying to work with some discussions on 135th and how this works with some sidewalks for May schools for the same reason that you just indicated. So there might be an option there.
Okay, well,
Okay.
now you're going to live with my walk-up song now
Bananas.
at the podium.
Is that your ringtone?
See, I had a plan and you wrecked it. Thanks
I
a lot,
did.
Chairman. I was all excited. Ask Sheena. Had it all queued up, watched the whole song go by with the lyrics playing so I could know when to stop it and play it. Zero fun. All right. CIP funding plan, the bottom line. So again, You all have a debt policy, a capital improvement policy, a special assessment policy that governs what we do with our capital improvement projects. It is important to note that our preference is to pay with cash when we can so that we're not paying interest. But you also will hear over time that some of these projects, this was Commissioner Unruh's favorite term, intergenerational equity, so that people who are using an asset over a long time are paying for that asset over a long time. So it makes it a little fairer. So that is a concept that kind of helps explain why governments generally are okay with debt. So your policy basically says that we have a team that looks at our debt together. It says that we're not ever going to use debt to fund operations. It establishes our benchmarks. You just had a policy update last April that establishes those thresholds. And it also tells us how we're going to actually structure any of our debt. So for example, if we are going to issue facility debt, the guidance is that it will be for 20 years, that we will pay off 30% of the bond principal in the first 5 years, and we will pay off 60% of the bond principal in the first 10 years. So what that means is we tend to pay more in those first 5 and 10 year marks, and then it decreases significantly in those final 10 years. And so that helps us with making sure that there's always capacity. We're never structuring ourselves so far out with debt that we can never issue new debt when we need to. You also have a policy, and I want to make sure to spend a minute on this, about how you will use your excess unassigned fund balance. Excuse me. So when Hope got in front of you yesterday and showed you our general fund balance, she talks about a number that's different than what you hear on the budget side. We have two bases of accounting that we primarily rely on. We have the GAAP basis, which is generally accepted accounting principles that the Hopes of the world live in. And then we have the budgetary basis that the Lorians of the world live in. Budgetary basis is more about what cash do you have to spend. Accounting basis is more about what are your liabilities and your assets. Sometimes those are non-spendable, right? They're inventories or they're buildings, and those buildings depreciate. And it tells a very different story than what your budgetary basis tells you. So in your budget, you can plan to use your fund balance but we use that GAAP basis to tell us how much cash is available. We have a policy that says you can use that excess balance for capital improvement. We calculate that excess by saying, okay, what's our general fund budget for the year? Take 20% of that, and then that has to be held in reserve because that's essentially 3 months of operating expenses. We want to make sure we can withstand that, especially because more than half of our budget, well, just over half of our budget comes from non-property tax sources. So there's some volatility there, and we want to make sure we can support anything we need to. So yesterday, when you heard that information based on the 2024 budget, you had $37 million in excess fund balance. It doesn't mean we want to spend it all down, but it does mean that you have some capacity to use that outlined here. So you can use it during the following budget cycle to lower the amount of bonds needed. So that's exactly what we're talking about in terms of capital improvement. We can also do it to fund one-time expenses that don't increase recurring operating costs. So we would use that for pretty much all of those other pieces of equipment that we talked about. So that is why when you have a recommended budget later this year, and many of these projects are funded with cash, it's going to be acceptable that some amount of that is used for these projects. So here's your grand total. When we take what Daniel has presented to you and what I have presented to you, you have your $104 million for facilities, your $3.7 million for drainage, and then your $454 million from roads and bridges. But note that $331 million of that comes from other sources for roads and bridges. What we want you to focus on is the cash that's up there in the top row, which is primarily, well, not primarily, it's exclusively the half percent for Commissioner Howell, 0.5% of the 1% sales tax that comes to Sedgwick County. It also then includes $20 million of debt for road and bridge in addition to what you heard before. So I told you this improves your bottom line of your forecast. Here's what it looks like for the general fund in terms of cash funded spending. Here's what it looks like in terms of your bond funded debt service. So your your bond and interest fund. And this is where we get to Commissioner Beatty's question about the right amount of debt. So right now, we have a significant amount of debt that's falling off the books. I'm going to point to you specifically 2028, $3.91 million. That is a huge amount of debt that comes off out of our debt service every year. If we were to truly remove that from our forecast, where we typically pay 12, I guess it can be 12 to 15 million on a typical year, that drops it substantially. That is a significant percentage of that. We want to make sure that by 2028, we are making plans to have some strategic bond funding, because otherwise we recreate the same situation that we had for the commission 17 or 18 years ago, where there was a mill levy increase to do bond funding. And we do not want to set any future commission up for that. We know that there are always going to be needs for an organization our size. So what we want to do is be strategic and practical in how we decide to load that debt and how we plan to replace those assets or add assets.
Hey, Lindsay,
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point that you made, and I want to make sure that the public understands. If we offload too much debt, and there's the interest payments we're making on the bond payments that we're making, the interest, we go too many years, outward years of not doing that, and then we start bond funding some projects, it'll require mill levy increase just for the interest.
Or
correct?
cuts to your operations.
Okay.
One or the
So
other.
that's why you want a steady debt to keep steady interest payments. That's
Right.
That's the philosophy, correct?
Yes, that's the philosophy. And if it was a situation where we weren't an organization with $1 billion in assets, an arena, a zoo, all kinds of EMS posts and fire stations and things where we primarily self-fund the insurance up to a certain amount. If we just thought we could ever manage without debt, we would look to reduce our.
So help me with the argument that we're just spending money to spend money. I agree
Yeah.
with the premise. I agree wholeheartedly, and I understand the principle, but what's the talking point? What's the argument against? Well, you're just spending money in debt financing just to do it now.
Well, I think what you've seen, my response to those folks would be look at what we just talked about in terms of needs and look at the $20 million of projects that are sitting on your watch list. Recognize that the age of our facilities is coming up on some, we're getting older and it doesn't get cheaper, and inflation's not getting cheaper. And we're hearing from folks that the property taxes are too high. We have to maintain assets in a reasonable fashion. And what we are trying to do is be strategic in our planning here to mitigate the amount of funding we have to do. We're not overspending. We're only spending on needs. If we added in once, this would be much larger.
Sure.
So my response to anyone who's critical that we're just spending money to spend money needs to go back and look at the presentation and see precisely how we're choosing to use property tax funds. We're talking about these facilities that are 20, 25 years old, aging out. We can't get replacements. Recognize that we have legal responsibilities where we owe duties to inmates and people in our care. And we're trying to make sure that we can maintain all of that.
Appreciate it.
And again, I would point back to your ACFR. There's a statistical section
Right.
in that document that shows the amount of debt load we've got. We're at less than 15% in our worst case of the limit of debt we can have. We have a AAA and stable outlook. We have that because we have very responsible debt management. You are frequently lauded for that in every one of the credit rating analyses that you get from any of those three major credit rating analysts. They all see the outlook and the types of projects that you're doing as necessary for continuing to do county business and nothing frivolous.
Yeah.
So does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, so getting we've talked about what's going away. I want to show you what's coming on board. And this is where I think this also gets to your question that you just asked. And that is, how are we spending our bond funded dollars? What are we actually planning to issue bond funding for? And so that's what you'll see on this slide. So again, we've got our juvenile services community-based building. You just heard Steve talk this morning about the need for these services and yet potential lack of funding. So even more reason for us to have a centralized campus that can share resources and make things more efficient. ComCare crisis, another huge need in our community. The household hazardous waste facility expansion, about $2 million. You saw the tremendous amount of loads that are coming into that facility. It's highly utilized. Our adult detention facility kitchen. We've all seen the pictures of what that facility looks like, its age, and the need that's there. Our adult detention facility, the electrical busway that's running underwater. And we had to replace that. We're going to have to issue some debt to reimburse ourselves for the cost of that project. And then because it was all a part of the campus, we're also funding the main courthouse chiller rebuild, which is why you had to shut down the street over there for a while and have those big cranes. We're going to reimburse ourselves for that cost. We plan to do that, all of that debt later this year. That's going to help stabilize our mill levy. These are things that mostly the work is already complete. We're finalizing costs and we're going to issue the debt for that. It's in your forecast. In 2026, we're planning to do that Public Works salt storage building. And I apologize for the S, that's just one building. So that's going to be issued, we anticipate, next year. In 2027, that project we just talked about before, the adult detention facility booking and property storage, where literally it hasn't been touched since the 90s and it's unsafe for our inmates and most especially our deputies. And then the Regional Forensic Science Center DNA Lab Edition. Again, the note here about how this is going to have minimal impact on your financial forecast because of what we talked about with the admin building debt that's coming off. And then 2029. We have that emergency preparedness center that we talked about, as well as the ComCare complex. So when we talk about issuing debt in these years, it's important for you to note that the new costs on principal and interest actually don't get picked up until the following year's budget. So that's why when you see a 2029 bond issuance and not a 2030 bond issuance, it's because we won't actually start paying on the 2029 issuance until 2030. So that's what's in your forecast. So from a facilities perspective, this is what we plan. And I think you could make a case to anyone that these are all necessary projects based on the information that you've received.
Why is there not an admin building on there?
Because you have already issued the bond for that. And you have indicated that we are not going to issue any more bonds for that. What we have issued thus far is it, and we issued that in 2024. So it's not any new debt that we anticipate to issue. Instead, those funds that we had planned to issue are now going to basically be associated with Regional Forensic Science Center instead. We had $7.5 million in for the original Regional Forensic Science Center project. When we couldn't get that land, that changed the entire story. And so now, instead of issuing that same debt for an admin building, we're instead going to say we're going to issue that for Regional Forensic Science Center. So all of this still for 2026 and beyond, all of this, or I guess not 2027 and beyond, we'll have to come to you with a project authorization. So you'll still have a vote on that, even in addition to the CIP that you do here. And then, of course, there will be construction contracts that you have to vote on and everything else. So there are many, many more action steps by the commission before any of this becomes final. But I just want you to have an understanding for what's in this tentative recommended CIP. So that is the final slide. And I am talked out and I'm sure you are exhausted.
You did good.
So what else do you need to know today?
Just, I guess, some feedback, if that's okay.
Please.
You know, I was so proud of Sedgwick County when they saved up money and built the arena.
Mhm.
How unusual is it for a government to build something of that magnitude with cash?
So we've had that conversation. I couldn't tell you in general, but I could tell you in talking with AJ, we are one of the only facilities that ASM Global manages internationally that had a situation like that.
And had the community gone into debt for that, again, we would still be paying on it.
We sure would.
And again, if you look how much interest we paid on that facility over 20 years, again, it could have been longer for something that large potentially. Maybe our policy to do 20, but for really large projects, I think, Wichita.
Yeah, it's just a guideline. We would want to be smart about it.
Isn't Wichita doing 50 years on their water treatment facility?
I don't know, that would make sense based on
50 years.
their funding. I mean, we're doing 40 years for the WSU experiential engineering bonds that we issued on their behalf through the PBC.
Of course, they made that choice.
They did.
Right. And I would have, if I had the opportunity to change their terms, I think it would have been a good discussion. But, when we do 20-year bonds, again, it's just simple math and the interest rates, because they're changing. This is not really the right number, but let's just say roughly 1/3 of the cost of that capital project goes back to paying interest,
Could be.
roughly. So you get about 2/3 principal, 1/3 is interest for any one project. And so the argument in the past has been, for routine debt that's not emergent need. And again, I would say also, when I say emergent, if we have to close a bridge because we don't have the money to take care of that bridge, that's an emergent issue. I don't want to have to close a bridge because it's unsafe. I want to be able to use debt to keep people, safely traveling around the community. And I don't know that we necessarily do this, but when bridges get to a certain sufficiency factor or insufficiency level, then it becomes more of an emergent issue. You need to take care of that bridge at that point. And I think the bridge work, in my opinion, is less of a concern. Because I don't think we're replacing bridges before they really need to be replaced. So that's, generally speaking, I think that's true. But the borrowing, the habitual borrowing of $4 million, and you saw that on slide shows $20 million. It's just planned. And so the big debate goes back when I first got here is that the right way to do this? And I think that there was people who argued that if you can, push off doing some of those repairs, use whatever cash you do have, cash that you would otherwise use for principal payments, before you know it, that you start to be able to cash fund those projects rather than having to habitually use debt, because about 1/3 of that money. So every time you borrow $20 million, you're paying back again over the life of those projects, about $6 million back. Let's just $5 or $6 million back over the 20 years, back in interest. So you borrow 20, you pay back 20, pay back 5 or 6 million. Maybe 7, depends on what number you want to use. And so that was the big debate. And so we tried to move away from that habitual borrowing, because it wasn't really the argument that we were necessarily doing emergent work. And again, I think on roads and bridges, because there's so many of them, and some of that stuff can maybe be, managed. It's not all necessarily emergent, that we were trying to not just habitually borrow that money. And when it comes to facilities like, large facilities where, I think that just using my personal finances as an example, buying a home, I think we all know when you buy a home, a mortgage is kind of almost expected. So could you buy it with cash? You could, but it's pretty unlikely. And so that term intergenerational equity, is that the term used?
Mm-hmm.
So if I rephrase that, using cash, it'd be some pay now for future use. That's cash. If you flip that around, it's, some future people pay future payments for our use today. So they're paying for us to use something today. We're paying for when we use cash, we're paying for something we get to pay for. They get to use it in the future. So both generations are, if you will, investing, if you will, in the other generation. I mean, people alive today, for someone else to enjoy, and vice versa. So I think that's an interesting idea, intergenerational equity. And I think that it becomes more important when you have really, really expensive projects. And we've talked about some expensive projects today. The admin building and some of the other things we're talking about. Some of the lesser expensive projects, I think if it's not an emergent issue, then I would rather not use debt routinely, or not really judiciously. And I understand your point about having tried to have a steady level of debt. I see your point. But I think what's being missed here is you could save up money in your budget for projects. So it's still an expenditure in your budget. You just, rather than pull the trigger on the project, you save up over a number of years and you do it. And at the end of the day, your budgets are still level, but you're using less money for interest because you didn't have the asset to enjoy earlier. You saved up for it and you paid for it later. So there is a savings to do it that way. The idea that it has to impact your budget, I don't know that I agree with that.
Well, and if you'd allow me just
Sure.
to mention, state budget law doesn't like us to save up money for capital improvement. It's not like the equipment fund that they've now authorized. They cap us at 5% of cash or fund balance that we can carry forward from year to year, because otherwise it appears that we're overtaxing. So there are some logistical challenges we would have to overcome to do what you've
Even if you
suggested.
identify the purpose,
Uh,
you want
even-
to save up $12 million for election equipment.
I mean, I guess
could do that. We
as
could
long
put
as
that-
we, well, remember, you have an equipment reserve fund now where that is permitted. We don't have anything like that. That would have to be saved in your general fund, and that's where we get into trouble. We would have to appropriate those dollars in order to carry it forward. And I don't know that the commission would like to grow the budget in that fashion.
Well, I would say that if, again, whether there's laws need to be changed, but if we identify the reason we're saving money, say it's not actually an emergency, we can actually, stay where we're at and save up money for a number of years and pay for something with cash. And they would simply understand these dollars are saved up for that purpose. It's earmarked for a spending plan. I actually think it's if there's a legislative solution to helping us do cash management that actually saves taxpayer money by not. And I understand there's competing things here because labor costs more and construction costs may go up. So while you're saving money, you are essentially the cost of the project may be also climbing. I call that chasing the rabbit. So as it's you're trying to outpace it, you're trying to save up money faster than it's escalating in price. But every road and every bridge, for example, there's a sweet spot that says we want to wear it out before you spend money to replace it. But there's also a point of diminishing returns where if you wait too long, it gets more expensive. So you want to do it there's an optimum time when to put the money into there to improve that road that's at least cost for the taxpayers. And that analysis hopefully says if you delay that project because you're saving up for it, understand the project costs are also escalating. So it's more complex than just simply when does a road need to be replaced because it's dilapidated to the point we can't really let it go any longer. And then we have to do something about that. But it's also the costs are higher. So there's multiple things you have to think there. But the idea of just using debt because it's other governments do, or because it's or in the habit of doing it. I don't really like those ideas. I just want to be very thoughtful and judicious and use debt, very carefully, and for things that are truly important, that are truly intergenerational, truly emergent, and at the right time. And those are all good principles to guide our debt theory here, rather than maybe other governments are not so thoughtful. But I think we've been very thoughtful. The only thing I disagree with you, Lindsay, is this idea that we would routinely use debt simply because we don't have a steady debt level. To me,
I understand.
If we could save up money and do it, at a time when it's best for us, we might save some interest there.
Understood.
Thank you.
Commissioner House started talking about the sales tax deal to fund Interest Bank Arena. My ears perked up. I thought we're going to do it.
Whoa, man, we're out of time.
Yeah, the AAA bond rating is also why this is really important, so that we can borrow at I just have one philosophical question. The sales tax, that we get because of the 1%, it was the ballot initiative. Is the thought behind that we are to use that 50% of the 1% is to be used on roads and bridges, or was the thought that it needed to be expended on roads and bridges in regards to that full capacity needed to be spended yearly? Was that the philosophy behind that ballot initiative, that if we have $38 million, it's appropriated, half of that needs to be spent on road and bridge, or just could only be spent on road and bridge? What was the thought process there?
So I can't speak to exactly what they were thinking in 1983 when they started first talking about this before it was enacted in 85. But I do know that in at least the last 35 years, the amount of money we get from local sales tax doesn't cover all the projects we need to do. Whether we're talking about, bridges or roads or maintenance, we have a backlog of projects. We always have.
Okay.
So it's not a matter of saying, hey, we get $20 million. Let's spend $20 million no matter what. What you'll actually see, and that's why you see each year, some years we're spending a little bit more,
Sure.
some years a little bit less. And that is the one nice thing we really do have with the sales tax, since it can only be used for road bridges. If we don't use that money in 2025, it's going to roll over the 2026 when we can road.
I think that's
Can
kind of
use
what the direction I was getting. Was it intended to be all expended because we need to expend it all? Or was it an issue of just the projects are going to use it all?
The crux of it, I do know hasn't changed. And that is, if you're going to have a strong, robust CIP for roads and bridges, you've got to have dedicated funding. One of the things that has absolutely decimated our stormwater department and project is the fact that we don't have dedicated funding. So we're in a drought right now. Nobody cares and nobody thinks about flooding, but someday we're not going to. And we're still going to have a backlog of 40 million, actually probably then 50, $60 million of projects that we knew were a problem, but we had a drought for the last 6 years and we didn't care about it. So we had other things to go on. But when you go to those municipalities like Dallas and Overland Park that have dedicated funding, they're able to take care of those drainage projects even during the drought years. So when the wet years come back, they're addressed and they're taken care of. The model is there. We adopted it for roads and bridges back in '85, which has been wonderful. And the nice part about it is, with being part of sales tax, like I said, it's not like we have to use that money every year. So when we do, because we're going to have a huge bridge that's going to cost us $8-9 million in 1 year.
Well, that's
We
what I
won't need
wanted
that
to
in
know.
the previous year, so
Okay.
we can hold that money.
Good to know. Okay, any other questions here? Lindsay, good job. Big day for you. It's a long afternoon for you.
So glad it's over.
Yeah. Daniel,
For putting up with
thank you. Appreciate all the work that goes into this and the thought that goes behind it. So, other questions? Tom, anything else? So, this is it for budget hearings, right? Maureen, good job. Appreciate all the work. Okay.
I do have one question. Do you want to schedule time to do a follow-up, like during a staff meeting or something? Or do you want to have Tom do 2-2-1s? How do you want us to get feedback
historically,
from
haven't you
everyone?
done, it was actually one-on-ones, is what I thought.
Well, that's for the recommended budget. I'm talking,
I thought CIP was included in that, so it's not.
it is, but one of the things that we would typically do after budget hearings would be to have a half an hour or an hour scheduled for commissioners for discussion to kind of give us any feedback publicly that you might want to from anything you've heard from the last week and a half.
Have we done that in 2-2-1 settings before, or? Let's do it in staff then.
I don't think, do you have a staff the next couple weeks? Yeah.
All right, we'll work through it. If it has to be a 2-2-1 or whatever, we can do that too. So, okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Yay, good job, everybody. Commissioner Wise, you survived the first one. Congrats.